Despite what you might think, the kart racing genre is actually alive and well today, and for whatever reason, after all these years, it's still one of my favorite genres, and I like to think I'll give just about any kart racer a shot. They're not all created equal though, so if you're into the genre and looking for something you might have missed, here's a good sample of what's out there for your PS4, and apparently your PS5 as well. But rest assured, if you're on Switch or Xbox, you can still probably play most, if not all, of these games. So, let's take a look. I figured I'd start things off with one of my favorite kart racers of all time, and easily one of the best of this generation, Team Sonic Racing. This is the third Sonic-themed racing game from Sumo Digital, and while I think I might slightly enjoy the last one, Transformed, better, this one is still a blast to play. This game is a bit different from the previous two in that it's entirely focused on the Sonic universe, as opposed to the far wackier Sega-verse, with characters like Gilius Thunderhead from Golden Axe and Joe Musashi from Shinobi, all racing against each other. I do miss that special flavor of nonsense that only a Sega mashup game can provide, but at the end of the day, I like the Sonic characters too, and they fill out the roster just fine. This entry also incorporates a team-based scoring system that basically combines the placement of each racer on a team to come up with the team score, and that cumulative score determines the winner of the race. I'll admit I was a little put off by this when they announced it, but after playing it I grew to like it quite a bit. You can sometimes run into instances where a lagging teammate can drag down the team and screw you out of a win by a hair, but that's pretty rare. And if you're using slipstreams and sharing items with some degree of frequency, that generally won't happen. If you play like a teammate, it usually results in a really fun twist on the kart racing format, which is always welcome in the genre as far as I'm concerned. But even if you don't warm up to it, there are standard race modes on and offline that don't use the whole team thing at all. Crush 40 returns to do the music here, and while I probably preferred their work on Transformed, I still like what they did here a lot. They never really disappoint. The vehicle upgrade system is pretty neat and gives you a lot of leeway with making your favorite character race largely how you want, with enough effort. But they do all have their areas of expertise by default. The biggest shame about this game, though, is that it just didn't seem to take off as well as Sumo and Sega probably hoped. I can hardly ever find anybody online, any time of the day, any time of the week, so I worry that we might not see another entry in the series, but I hope that's not the case. The Sonic racing games are some of the best things to come out of the Sonic franchise in the last decade or so, and I highly recommend all three of them. Ever feel like kart racing vehicles are just too big? Well, Tabletop Racing World Tour is the latest entry in this series that focuses on small, toy-sized cars racing on, well, tabletops. Sure, it's a bit gimmicky, but the tracks are actually designed pretty thoughtfully, with lots of household items like books, toys, and kitchen utensils everywhere that affect the tracks and really give it a nice style. The racing itself is pretty decent and doesn't fall into being too slow or excessively easy like a lot of other budget kart racers do. It gives you a lot of things to work toward unlocking, like better weapons and vehicles. Even drifting isn't necessarily available on every vehicle by default, so for the low-end price of the game, I think you get a fair amount of content and variety. There aren't as many tracks as I would like, but what's here is pretty decent. The soundtrack has a lot of EDM-style songs that get obnoxious to me, but I appreciate the energy it gives the races. Not for everybody, but if you're a fan of the genre and want something a little different, you could definitely do worse. Speaking of worse, Beach Buggy Racing is one of Vector Unit's many mobile game ports, and like most of them, it's somewhere between mediocre and good. Never quite falling into what I would call bad, but never quite rising into anything near great either. The characters, cars, and tracks all pull off the generic cartoony look pretty well, and there are a decent amount of things to unlock if you find yourself wanting to do that. But the racing itself isn't super engaging in my opinion. Also, since drifting just automatically happens every time you turn sharply enough, it takes away that little bit of strategy and freedom that other kart racers have where you drift manually. The weapons are pretty okay, but you can't fire anything behind you, unless, of course, that's what it's already meant for. So again, kind of makes the game feel a little shallow compared to others. That said, I wouldn't call beach buggy racing bad at all, it's just okay. It's basically the definition of okay. With so many other options out there, I don't really see a big need to pick this one up though, unless you just want a really simple kart racer to play with your kids or something. As far as random franchises that I would never have expected to see get a kart racing game go, I'd say Garfield pretty much takes the cake. Or the pizza, or lasagna, or whatever the hell Garfield likes, who cares? Garfield Kart Furious Racing is actually a remaster of a much older Garfield kart racing game, and it shows. I never played the original game, but I'm betting they didn't do much to it outside of a very conservative update to the visuals. You've got John, Garfield, Odie, and some other characters that I don't recognize and you probably don't either. Customization is pretty much limited to hats that give some random bonuses to the racers and cosmetic spoilers for the karts. And none of it really makes playing through the dull tracks feel worth it. I wanted to like this one, and it does have a few things going for it, but unless you're some kind of massive Garfield fan or a kart racing enthusiast like myself, I don't really recommend it. Here's another one that I actually really enjoy despite the sum of its parts not being super impressive. All Stars Fruit Racing focuses on fruit-themed cartoony characters and is a complete explosion of saturated bright colors at every turn. It's almost too much, but I like its look overall. You can tweak your favorite kart pretty thoroughly. There's a good variety of tracks and events, and the racing isn't bad at all. It's never quite able to totally shake that low-budget feel, but it does a good job for what it is. My only real complaints are that some of the events take way too long to complete, as they can be way more laps than are necessary, and the vast majority of the races are entirely too easy once you get the hang of them. Don't get me wrong, I'm pretty good at these games, but even Beach Buggy Racing, the game most overtly intended for kids on this list, gave me way more of a challenge than this game ever does. So, odds are you'll spend most of the time half a lap ahead of your closest opponent, if not more, and I think that's a pretty big flaw for any racing game. When I reviewed this game way back when, I gave it a fairly mediocre score because of this, and I think I still mostly stand by that. And it's kind of a shame, but at the end of the day, I still think there's more to like here than not, especially if you're really into the genre and are looking for something outside of the mainstream to play. When I found out there was a kart racer featuring some of Nickelodeon's classic cartoon characters, I was pretty interested. Those characters are perfect for a kart racing game, but I haven't seen it done since the PS1, so I impulse bought the game and Vector Unit. Uh-oh. Well, now that your expectations are properly adjusted, you can actually get a bit of enjoyment out of this one. The characters look decent, although it's mostly just the ultra-mainstream ones like Arnold, SpongeBob, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which I still don't personally associate with Nickelodeon at all, but here they are. Don't expect any deep cuts like Rocco or Ren and Stimpy or Invader Zim, just the mainstream crowd pleasers here, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, the core moment-to-moment racing in this game isn't half bad. It's not as precise as I would like, it feels a little mushy at times, especially when you're drifting, but you can get used to it and get a little bit of enjoyment. The higher speed classes put up a decent challenge. The weapons are serviceable, the tracks are appropriately colorful and full of slime, and the handling and drifting feels okay but not great. The tracks themselves can sometimes have some nice touches, like secret shortcuts and slime-themed boating sections. Slime plays a big role here. The more slime you run over, the more boost you build up, and that generally makes the difference between winning or not, especially at the higher speed classes. The big complaint I have with this game isn't with any of that though, it's really just the fact that none of the characters ever say a word. With such iconic cartoon characters in the game, it really sticks out like a sore thumb that they never make a sound. which seems really odd to me. And I know some people complain about kart racing characters talking too much, but with this iconic roster of characters, it's just weird that they're totally silent. To me, that just feels like a huge missed opportunity to make the game really feel like the authentic mashup that it could have. As a kart racer, on paper, it's okay. It's got some decent kart customization, it looks okay, and plays passably, but outside of that, it's a little disappointing. Okay, take everything I just said about the first Nickelodeon kart racing game and bring everything up a notch or two for this one. Firstly, there's a much better selection of characters. Most of what we got in the last game, plus Invader Zim, Heifer, Rocco, Squidward, and more, have all been added, which is nice. The tracks are also way more vibrant, with more detail and depth. Some of them even have a bunch of stuff happening in the background, like top-tier kart racing games do. Most importantly though, the racing itself has absolutely been refined here. Driving feels a lot more responsive and snappy. Drifting in particular is much better. The items and weapons you get are much better too, like this realistic hand from SpongeBob that genuinely brings a stupid smile to my face every time I see it. You also have chiefs and crew members that you can pick from a huge list of even more obscure characters that basically give you buffs, like going temporarily invisible after landing an attack on an enemy or gaining boost a lot faster, stuff like that. There's a lot of these to play around with, which I like a lot. The music is also a lot better. It never quite reaches Crush 40 levels, but it does get surprisingly close with a similar style. It's a huge improvement from the elevator music of the last game. Annoyingly, there's still no voices from any of these characters in the game though, which is even more baffling now considering how much they've improved in other areas, but for whatever reason, they've left that out again. I mean, just imagine if we had one of Zim's maniacal laughs here. While it still falls short of being outstanding, this is a big step up from the last game and a legitimately good kart racer in its own right. So if you are interested in either of these Nickelodeon kart racers, then just get this one. Hopefully the developer can really button up this concept and nail it with the third game. I originally wasn't going to include this game for the video because I just don't have much interest in the Cars movies, but as I was finishing up the script, it went on sale on PSN for a few bucks, so I figured I'd give it a whirl. And it's not great. The driving feels good, there's multiple ways to get boosts, including air tricks and driving backwards, and the graphics are pretty good for the style. It doesn't quite look like the movies, but it's in the ballpark. There's a few decent event types, but honestly the best way to spend your time is in the battle races, which basically play like you would expect a typical kart racer to play, with weapons and drifting and whatnot.
Oh, there goes some cracking rock. Somebody's eyes are really...
The biggest problem here is that the entire game is dragged down by these mind-numbingly boring tracks. There's just so little going on with them, both functionally and with how they look. There are some alternative routes here and there, and a couple of opportunities to get big jumps in, but it's not much help when the tracks themselves are so bland. Thanks to the controls and the general gameplay being decent, sometimes I would dare to call the game fun, but it's only in short, fleeting moments. To get really subjective, I gotta say I also just hate these characters. I didn't love them in the movie, but I really find them annoying here. I'm not sure if these are the original voice actors or not, nor do I really care, but I'm going to assume not. And because of that, I would say this sort of has the opposite problem that the Nickelodeon racers do, where these characters just won't shut up. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised by the game in some respects, and if you have a kid who loves the Cars movies, and you can get it on a deep sale like I did, then it might be a fun way to spend a weekend. But outside of that, you should probably pass on it. This is an odd racing game, but I really like it, and even though there aren't any karts technically, it does check pretty much every other box for being a kart racer, so I'm including it. This is a Toho or Tuhu game, and I'm not super familiar with the franchise, but it does seem to have a few spin-offs, and this is one of them. It's a racing game where these anime girls race, but instead of in vehicles, they just ride on each other. It's more than just a visual gimmick though, because switching back and forth between your two characters can help certain situations, as some of the characters are faster than others, or better at taking corners, etc. Plus, I think you get a very small little boost every time you switch. I'm not sure, but I think you do. There's also lots of fun items to use, and once you start to memorize what they all do, you can start winning races. The tracks are also pretty cool, with many of them being downright gorgeous. I wish there was a bit more going on in the tracks to make them pop a little bit more, but overall the variety between them is really nice, and that keeps things interesting more than you might expect. The main campaign does have a story that isn't bad, but you can also totally ignore it if you want. And the races do spike up in difficulty quickly, so it's best to get familiar with how it works early on. This is by no means the best game on the list, but it actually ended up being one of my favorite kart racers for the PS4 once I got used to its various eccentricities. If you like weird racing games or anime game spin-offs, I can give this one a really solid recommendation. Now we're at what many consider to be the best kart racing game in years, and I don't think I disagree necessarily. Crash Team Racing Nitro-Fueled is a remaster of the old CTR on PS1, with some tracks from Nitro Kart and I think Tag Team Racing from the PS2 also thrown in. So it's sort of a compilation in a way too. Just about all of the characters from the Crash Bandicoot series are here, and it has a ton of personality. And there's a boatload of unlockable costumes and variants for each character. After playing the game off and on for several years, I still don't really feel like I've made a dent in it at all. The game is also quite a bit different from other kart racers in that drifting uses both shoulder buttons to fill your gauge and spend that on boosts before the gauge fills all the way up. And it does have a learning curve, but it's really fun once you get used to it. Also, hopping off of something high enough will give you a boost as well, so there's a lot of strategy for each track, and if you're good, you can keep boosting most of the time. Items are all pretty self-explanatory, which is nice, and the tracks are absolutely outstanding. Most of the design quirks from 20 years ago are still here, so if you knew any weird shortcuts in the old games, odds are they will work here too. And if you don't know any of them, prepare to get your ass handed to you online. Speaking of online, this is easily the best game on the entire list if you're looking for a thriving multiplayer community. I've jumped online at a lot of different times throughout the week, and I always seem to find enough people to get a reasonably populated race. And that's pretty cool for a several-year-old kart racer. The recreated music is also a great plus, and it sounds great. Whoever put the soundtrack together deserves a firm handshake and a little pat on the head. 2 pats, not 3. So that does it for the kart racers that I've had a chance to play on the PS4. Overall, I'm pretty happy with most of what's out there right now, but if I had to pick favorites, I think the Sonic and Crash games are pretty clear winners. But I would give Gensou Skydrift and the second Nickelodeon racing game pretty solid recommendations too. Going forward, I'm interested to see where the genre goes from here, especially in this new generation, and I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for what's next. But until then, thanks for watching.